There was a bump in Apocalypse Now, I guess, and then there's another era of you coming
Apocalypse
back.
Now was not a bump. It was an experience, and a valuable experience. So I learned a lot by getting involved in Apocalypse Now.
The process of finding an actor to play Willard proved to be as difficult as it would be to quote-unquote find the character of Willard. Coppola's first choice to play Captain Willard was Hollywood cool guy Steve McQueen. McQueen was interested and spent some time with Apocalypse Now screenwriter John Milius and his friend Steven Spielberg during the summer.
He decided he was going to take Spielberg and I and make us into men that summer. And so he took us to biker bars, and he was into full contact karate, which was just ridiculous. He'd get dressed up in these padded suits with this other guy, and they'd practice all these weird oriental moves, and then they just flail around like two little kids and fall on the floor.
McQueen wanted to be paid more than Coppola, demanding a $3 million fee, and Coppola was on board. Author of Coppola's monster film, The Making of Apocalypse Now, Stephen Travers thinks that Coppola may have been motivated by, quote, the chance to work with the man who wrecked the marriage of his nemesis, Robert Evans. During the time of The Godfather's release, Evans' wife, actress Ally McGraw, was cheating on him with McQueen. McQueen and McGraw would later be married. Realistically, though, McQueen was a Hollywood legend, so it was likely that Coppola and Milius had already been fans of his. While McQueen ultimately passed on the role, he was involved long enough to have some clashes around the Willard character in the screenplay. According to Coppola, McQueen, quote, never wanted to have a scene where he said anything or did anything, and he always had to have the best of everything.
Krusty has laryngitis on a bad back, so he won't be saying anything or doing anything.
McQueen seemed to have an idealistic view of the Willard character, envisioning a man who, as Coppola put it, knows everything all the time and was always cool and being a smartass. McQueen ended up deciding to pass on the project, not because of creative differences, but because he was not up for spending the planned 4 months out in the jungle, which ended up being over a year. He expressed that he did not want to leave his wife, Ally McGraw, and their young son to spend 17 weeks on location in the Philippines. Coppola suggested the whole family come out to Manila, but McQueen declined since his older son would be graduating from high school. It turns out that McQueen had been suffering from the cancer that would end up killing him 4 years later, but hardly anyone knew at the time. They needed to find someone different to take on the central role. But who could fill McQueen's shoes?
Germany. It's extreme prejudice. Are you an assassin or a soldier?
After McQueen was out, Coppola considered some other friends and big names. Jack Nicholson, Robert Redford, and James Caan all declined the role. He then approached Al Pacino, who he had worked with on The Godfather. Pacino liked the script, but like McQueen, he didn't want to spend 4 months in the jungle working on a Coppola film, having suffered health problems while filming in the Dominican Republic for The Godfather Part 2. While on location in Santo Domingo for The Godfather Part 2, the already exhausted Pacino ended up catching pneumonia, and his doctor ordered him to take a month off to recover. I guess that's why you don't go around giving the kiss of death. During that month, Coppola went to New York City to shoot more of the Robert De Niro sections of the film. When Pacino turned down the role of Willard, he said to Coppola, I know what this is going to be like. You're going to be up there in the helicopter telling me what to do, and I'm going to be down there in the swamp for 5 months. Marlon Brando also refused to be a part of the project, and it was at this point that a frustrated Coppola scooped up his 5 Oscars and threw them out the window, breaking 4 of them. I mean, what's the point in winning an Oscar if it doesn't help you with your next projects? I'm guessing the awards are more fragile than they look because Coppola's father Carmine accidentally dropped and broke his Oscar shortly after winning at the 1975 Academy Awards. Even though Pacino himself didn't end up playing Willard, Coppola wanted similar types for the patrol boat crew. He said he wanted to cast unknown quote-unquote young Pacinos, saying, the war was fought by children. Redford and McQueen are too old. After casting Pacino didn't pan out, Coppola approached Martin Sheen, who was a rising young talent at the time. Besides being more affordable than the big stars, Sheen had impressed Coppola and producer Fred Roos during the final screen test for the role of Michael in The Godfather.
Mr. Brazzi went after them, and so the story goes.
So he became their top choice. But Sheen was committed to a role in The Cassandra Crossing, which was filming in Italy, so he had to decline. They hired Harvey Keitel, the breakout star of Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets from only a few years earlier.
Michael, nobody's out to screw you. Hey, I guarantee that.
Keitel signed a contract to star in Apocalypse Now for $1,538.46 per week, which would come out to $80,000 for the year. The idea being that shooting would be finished within that time. They were expecting a 14-week shoot. Keitel may not have been the first or second or even third choice for Willard, but on the plus side, he was the only one in the PBR cast, including the yet-to-be-cast Martin Sheen, who had actually served in the Marines. With the cast and crew set, production was ready to begin. On the first day of shooting, Coppola gathered the cast and crew together for a good luck ritual that he had been doing since making his first films in college.
You say this word 3 times, Powaba.
Bisogna dire queste parole 3 volte.
What's the word? Powaba.
Powaba.
Powaba. 1, 2, 3.
The only thing I could find about the meaning of Powaba is, quote, to catch or take something from, and a word that expresses action or a state of being. So I imagine that chanting Powaba is meant to try and capture and harness the luck around them. The first couple of shots of the production took place on March 20th, and were of Willard being taken by helicopter to the patrol boat. We can see here Keitel getting onto the boat, and it sailing away. However, there was already a problem. A mix-up caused Keitel and others to be stranded on a raft. Keitel used his walkie-talkie to say, "Hello, this is Harvey Keitel," but there was no answer. Keitel then half-jokingly said, "You wouldn't do this to Marlon Brando." Production designer Dean Tavaleris had picked out a variety of locations all over the island of Luzon, which was the location of a World War II battle between General MacArthur's forces and the Japanese. On April 15th, Coppola got together with editors George Berndt and Richie Marks and producers Fred Roos and Gray Fredrickson to watch the rushes, footage of what has been shot, of Keitel as Willard. In her diary, Eleanor Coppola wrote of that night. Afterward, Francis sat down on the couch with the editors and Gray and Fred, the producers. He said, "Well, what do you think?" I went upstairs to say goodnight to the boys, and when I came down about 15 minutes later, they were already on the phone making plane reservations for flights to LA the next day. Francis had made the decision to replace his leading man. Gray said, "Jesus, Francis, how do you have the guts to do it?" The rushes took about 10 days to reach the Philippines from the lab in Rome, but apparently this was something Coppola had been thinking about even before seeing them. Earlier, Coppola had dinner with cinematographer Vittorio Storaro and said, "Vittorio, I have a problem. I think I have to replace the main actor, the assistant director, and the props guy." There's been much speculation as to what happened with Keitel. Storaro said, "Francis needed the audience to identify with Willard. There was more passion in Martin Sheen. His soul was more in front of the camera. The audience could identify with him. His performance is almost not a performance." Editor Walter Murch said, "Willard is virtually a completely inactive character. Almost the only thing he ever does is kill Kurtz. For the rest, he's a passenger. He's a vehicle for the audience to look at this world through. And so the audience must be able to accept the Willard they see as being their own pair of eyes, through which they regard this strange world of war. I think Francis felt unsure that an audience would accept Harvey Keitel as their eyes. They'd watch him do things and be fascinated by that, but they would not accept him as an inactive person." Part of this was that Keitel's, quote, stock and trade is a series of tics, ways to make people look at him, which wouldn't work for an inactive character. What's funny about this is that I've heard many times that this is a trademark of Steve McQueen, that even when he wasn't the focus, he would be doing little things to get people to look at him instead of who is talking. So what about Coppola? Well, he said, "I had searched for someone to be in the film. I had hoped for McQueen for the part. After I realized that that wasn't going to happen, I settled on Martin Sheen, but he wasn't available. Fred Roos pushed hard for Keitel, whom I admired as an actor, but I didn't feel he was right for the role, which was really very much that of an observer, a man gazing out into the jungle. And I didn't think he'd be the kind of passive man, a face if you'd like, gazing out into the jungle. When we got to the Philippines, I could see that he was very uncomfortable about conditions in the jungle, and I thought, not only do I think he's wrong casting, but what's it going to be like for 6 months in these difficult conditions in the jungle for a city guy who's afraid of it? I just decided to make this tough decision. Harvey's always been gracious about it, so I'd say that this was just one of the most difficult things that happened. But I feel I made the right decision for the picture."
I'm here to help. If my help's not appreciated, lots of luck, gentlemen. No, Mr. Wolf.
In a separate interview 23 years after the events, Coppola gave a similar explanation saying, "Harvey Keitel is a fine actor, and I did not replace him because of his acting talent, which he has more than made evident over the years. I never was 100% sure that he was right for the role. Willard, by his nature, is a kind of more passive observer. Harvey is an extremely active actor, and you want to look at him all the time. I cast him because he seemed to be the most talented actor we could choose. Then later, when we got him out to the Philippines, I worried that much of the movie was going to be him observing and thinking. Another thing was that Harvey was incredibly uncomfortable in the jungle, among weird creatures and boats, and I thought, my god, I'm gonna be with this guy for 9 months in the jungle, and he's not comfortable. So I had to make a grown-up decision and recognize that I'd made a mistake. It's always hard to fire an actor. Also, it's worth noting that we just went from the expected length of the shoot, going from 14 weeks to 6 months to 9 months. Part of why having to fire Keitel was, to Coppola, quote, so bad and a terrible thing, was that Coppola worried about the effect that this could have on Keitel's career for his own casting mistake. He said that it was a very, very hard decision, but during this time he was in the appropriate mindset to pull the trigger on these kinds of tough decisions for the sake of the movie. Producers Fred Roos and Gray Fredrickson went to Keitel's hotel room to let him know of the decision to recast the role. Fredrickson claimed that Keitel was almost relieved, saying, "Oh, thank you so much. Listen, would you come out with me? I want to buy a suitcase and some luggage." Fredrickson said, "I think Harvey realizes, as well as Francis, that it wasn't his kind of role. He's a New York street guy, and this was a different kind of role for him. He didn't quite feel right with it. It was a mutual thing." However, Keitel had this to say, "I was the only person there who knew how to handle the jungle. I was the only one who had ever been in the Marines. I don't think we communicated well. We dashed. It was a matter of a young actor who was an ex-Marine out of Brooklyn, meeting up with a talented director who was out of UCLA and some fraternity."
It would seem like Apocalypse Now was a somewhat hurtful to your career at that point, no?
I can't say that.
Okay.
I was disappointed, and I was hurt on some level, yes. But like I say, I look at every event as an opportunity to learn something from it. It only remains hurtful in the bad sense if you don't look at it as an opportunity to learn something from it.
All that remains of Keitel's performance in the final film is this shot. That's Keitel on the boat. The day after Keitel's firing, the production shut down and Coppola was on a plane to Los Angeles. Coppola didn't want the press to find out that there were problems with the production, so he tried to look inconspicuous. At this point, Coppola was 35 pounds lighter, and so he thought he could get away with disguising himself.
I had shaved my beard off to go back to LA when I was involved in the recasting of the part of Willard, and I wanted to go back and didn't want to have controversy, so I shaved my beard so that I could be back in the USA without being recognized.
He met with Martin Sheen in the VIP lounge at the airport to discuss Sheen taking on the role of Willard. More on this in a bit. When the news of the recasting finally broke in Hollywood, Variety magazine wrote an article about what happened. It's important to note here that by this time, Marlon Brando had reconsidered taking on a role in the film. The article reads, "Harvey Keitel has been fired from the lead role of Apocalypse Now in what Keitel's agent, Harry Ufflin of ICM, says is a contract dispute over the possibility to shut down all summer to accommodate Marlon Brando." Coppola returned to Hollywood late last week from the Philippines location of the Vietnam War pick, while shooting was stopped for the Easter holiday period, and fired Keitel in a letter Friday from his attorneys to Ufflin. Ufflin, angered at the turn of events, said, "I had to call Harvey in the Philippines and tell him. They didn't have the decency to call him." A Coppola spokesman said that there is a possibility that the film may go into hiatus this summer because Brando doesn't want to work while his children are on school vacation. The plan being discussed was to build sets for Brando's sequence during the summer, and reassembled for brief September shooting. But Ufflin said Keitel balked because he had Coppola's prior permission to appear in another film at that time. The situation raised doubts in Keitel's mind about the desirability of being under long-term contract with Coppola, Ufflin said. An oral agreement to that effect had been made before filming started late last month, per the agent, but no contract had been signed. Ufflin said the firing occurred after Keitel requested a meeting with Coppola to iron out the dispute. Keitel had been highly touted by Coppola as one of his 5 initial contractees in the producer-director's much-publicized attempt to counteract the high-price star syndrome. This article paints quite a different picture than what we just discussed. The article got several things wrong. Keitel was told in person before the call from his agent. He was fully paid for the period he worked, and recasting the role had nothing to do with Brando's schedule.
I do believe you. That's what I want everybody to believe.
Shortly after being fired, Keitel was interviewed by the Los Angeles Times in which he said that he was set to sign a 7-year contract, but had a verbal agreement with Coppola in which Coppola gave him assurances. Then, when the production was scheduled to shut down for 3 months because of Marlon Brando, Keitel asked to meet with Coppola and was instead given a 5-page letter from the lawyers saying that Keitel, quote, had repeatedly refused to fulfill his obligation to execute a written memorialization. Keitel said, "If I have one god in my life, it's not going to be Francis Coppola. Had I known then what I know now, I would have kept my mouth shut longer and had them shoot so much they couldn't fire me." Back on April 16th, when Coppola was about to leave for LA to meet with Martin Sheen in disguise, Eleanor Coppola wrote, "This morning Francis got up even earlier than usual. He didn't sleep much during the night. He started shaving his beard off. When he got down to the breakfast table about 6 a.m., the boys were pretty surprised. He has been wearing contact lenses lately because it's easier to look through the camera without glasses. And he's lost about 35 pounds. He really did look different. He said he wanted to go to LA and not be noticed by the press. He didn't want a lot of rumors to start about the film being in trouble before he had a chance to recast the part. Later, he said he shaved off his beard to prove to himself as sort of an outward symbol that even when he is really in trouble, he is capable of change." Fred Roos said, "It was a little embarrassing, firing an actor and then coming back to recast. I don't think many directors would have had the courage to shoot for a month with an actor, suck it up and say, 'This is a mistake,' and stop and recast. Usually people just live with such mistakes." Again, they offered the role of Willard to Jack Nicholson, who was already working on a new project. They contacted Martin Sheen, who was in Rome for Easter. Sheen immediately flew to California on Good Friday and met with Coppola and Roos at LAX, the Los Angeles airport. They had only 15 minutes to talk before Roos and Coppola's flight was scheduled to leave. Sheen had really wanted the part of Willard, and the next day he got the call asking him to take on the role, and the day after that, Sheen was on a flight to the Philippines. During this time, the production was still going on back in the Philippines, filming some shots of Robert Duvall as Kilgore. As it turned out, they could reshoot everything they had done with Keitel in 4 days, and they'd be back on track, considering Sheen was already familiar with the script. On April 24, 1976, only 8 days after Keitel was fired, Eleanor Coppola wrote this in her diary. "I can hear the voice of one of the military advisors in the hut a few feet away talking to Martin Sheen. He was cast as Willard on Francis's trip to LA. This is Martin's first day on the set. He was at our house last night until curfew at 1 a.m. Coppola realized that the problem wasn't just Keitel, but how the entire production had been going, and this was his chance to begin again. He wrote a memo to himself reading, "What I have to tell Marty really is that the little work we've done so far has been totally off the mark. That if we were to do the whole film this way, it would be a total turkey probably, and nobody would care very much for the character or the performance, and it would be a source of great pain. I think in a nutshell, the secret is not to play Willard as a nice guy. Because he's a leading man, we think there's an obligation to play him as a nice guy. He doesn't have to be a nice guy. To wit, although he gets put on this boat with these sailors, he's the captain, we don't have to assume that he is good to them. He is annoyed by them. He has no privacy from them. He doesn't want to go on the mission with them. He's stuck with them. And the whole trip could be a gigantic being put out for him. Mr. Clean's radio and teeny bopper vernacular. Lance's kind of oafish adulation for him. The chef's eccentricity in smoking grass all the time. And the chief's kind of do-good, saintly, holier-than-thou act." In an interview, Sheen said, "Making that film was an ordeal, not just physically, but emotionally. I was staying in this hotel and right outside was all this poverty, pigs running around, children without teeth. And so it would be Martin Sheen as the lead in the biggest Vietnam War film ever made." What's interesting is that about 10 years later, his son Charlie would be the lead in another huge Vietnam War movie.
Somebody once wrote, "Hell is the impossibility of reason." We get up at 5.
At first, I thought they'd handed me the wrong dossier. I couldn't believe they wanted this man dead. About 1,000 decorations, etc., etc.
I loved you in Wall Street!
Wait, no, not that one. This one.
Somebody once wrote, "Hell is the impossibility of reason." That's what this place feels like. Hell.
I had some personal concerns about my own physical condition. I was 36 at the time, and I felt old and out of shape, and I was smoking 3 packs a day. Not a healthy guy. I wondered if I'd be able to keep up a strenuous schedule. At the time I hired on, remember, it was only a 16-week shoot, which didn't prove to be the case, but who knew that at the time, you know?
When Coppola came back to the Philippines after firing Keitel and recasting Willard in Los Angeles, he found that Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, who had promised the use of helicopters given to the government by the United States, was having more trouble with the nearby rebels than expected. It was sort of up in the air whether the much-needed military vehicles would be available for use on the production. Coppola reached out to the American Department of Defense one last time, hoping that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld would, in essence, finance the movie like they did with John Wayne's The Green Berets. Again, the Pentagon said that they would only help if the script was rewritten to remove the quote-unquote objectionable portions of drug use and other moments that shed a negative light on the American military. The main issue, however, was the military and CIA ordering an American officer to be assassinated, which the Department of Defense said would never happen. Stephen Travers writes, "The Pentagon objections certainly would have grown over the changes to the Milius script, much shot on the fly by Coppola. At first, to Milius's consternation, the director veered the story sharply to the left politically, replacing much if not all of the jingoism with couched representations of America as pseudo-war criminals, in the form of frightened boys forced to perform horrible acts in which they would otherwise never engage. But all of that was still in the future. For now, Coppola was forced to go it alone, increasingly in every way. Neither the government nor the Hollywood system was with him. The Pentagon did offer some ideas for ways to change the story to meet their needs. One was to have Willard's mission to find and bring back Kurtz for a court-martial. Coppola countered with a compromise to have a civilian give Willard the orders to assassinate Kurtz, but the Pentagon refused. There was a similar impasse between the Pentagon and the production of Patton, which Coppola wrote. Patton's battle scenes were shot in Spain with, quote, equipment the Spanish government had been given by the United States. What's funny is that there's a reference to the military cooperation with John Wayne's Vietnam film in the mission briefing scene that never made it into the final film.
I haven't thought about him that much. I saw the movie.
What movie? Green Berets, General. John Wayne.
Oh, yes. We gave cooperation to that movie. God knows how many troops, how many helicopters we furnished to make the green beanies look like soldiers.
In the next episode, we will continue the movie with the haunting mission briefing scene, where Willard is given his quest, and where we begin to see the line between the story of the movie and the story of the production begin to blur. This episode's companion PDF contains a short article I wrote on why Harvey Keitel may have been more suited to play Captain Willard than you might think. It also has some behind-the-scenes photos, info from Walter Murch on why they didn't reshoot the shots of Harvey Keitel that made it into the final film, and a selection of interesting comments from the previous episode. It's yours for just $1, and you can check out easy with PayPal. Your support really helps keep the channel afloat during copyright issues and other annoying problems that inevitably arise while making these. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks for watching.